There it is. Welcome, everybody. This is the front-end architecture rapid diffs call. We have one point in the agenda. Stanislav, do you want to walk us through?
Sure. I've made an issue to use Pinia as our primary global state manager for rapid diffs instead of using Vuex, which is deprecated now. So I've made this MR, and I also made an MR to our development documentation so that Pinia can be used by anyone who wants to use it. But now I'll focus on how can we use Pinia in the rapid diffs.
Question.
Yeah, sure.
This MR you linked is the global one, right? The global docs MR that you have.
Yeah, it's wrong link, sorry.
Okay.
Thank
It's
you
still
for
useful.
pointing that out.
I just want to make sure that we see the thing you expect us to see.
Should be the right link now. I'll give just a
Yes.
brief
Okay.
walkthrough.
Share the screen and walk us through, maybe?
Yeah. Give me a second. Okay, so Pinia has a lot of advantages over Vuex. In the docs, you can see obvious ones, like you don't have to use mutations, no namespacing, so you have to import stores directly, so the dependencies are clear. A lot of minor benefits, but I think the most important benefits that I describe in this issue is that you no longer have to do this. You don't have to create a store that basically contains every single state in your application. And what Pinia allows you to do is to do exactly that. Like separate all your stores based on the features, and or you can call this responsibilities, and group them up so it's much easier to understand and to reason about without dealing with the overhead that Vuex introduced with root namespaces, with root getters, root state. There's no such thing in Pinia. All the stores are on the same level, so you can import any store you want directly. Yeah, and one of the great benefits of Pinia is it doesn't punish you for doing that. So if we look at our current code and go to getters, for example, if you look at discussions getter, it accesses roots getters property, and it's really hard to understand what root getters actually represents. In order to understand that, you have to go to the node store. You have to figure out which of these stores we are actually trying to access, and only then you'll figure out which property that is. So with Pinia, that is solved by using sort of like composition API. So if you look here for an example, so yeah, this is an example of how we can use dependencies between stores. So let's imagine this is our div store, and we need to access nodes. We don't have to use root getters or root state. We can just import our node store and use it as usual. So the dependencies are clear. And for example, when we are refactoring or changing the structure of your store, you can actually see which stores are you affecting by that. And also it makes testing much more easier. Like you can mock this whole store in your tests and don't even have to think about it anymore, which is really convenient. Also, I think it's obvious that Pinia is really close to Vuex, so you don't have to relearn the whole new paradigm of how to manage store. Same reactivity, same simple integration with map getters, map state, etc. in components. So instead of seeing code like this, it will be more like map actions and a lot of different smaller stores. So that's it. Any questions?
Thanks. Any questions?
So I reviewed about 3 hours of this recording of the past meeting. There's one thing it's not entirely very clear to me, is why we decided to propose an alternative way to start with. What are some of the problems we were trying to solve? I think it was mentioned over and over time about the use of global store and sort of like how everything's just messed up in there. And this, what was just presented, the modular approach, will solve that. So my question is, any other things that started this whole conversation?
It's a great question. I will start, then you can add. So it starts with the experience of maintaining the code base for the Diffs app over many years, and how every time we want to either add a feature or troubleshoot a bug or something, the code is incredibly complex to navigate. And one of the reasons for that is the huge actions file that we have, and all the separation between actions and mutations makes it really convoluted to understand the flow of data, and essentially it's just been growing and growing and growing, becoming really hard to maintain just from the bottom line. So the goal of this project is not only to improve perceived performance, but also to improve the developer experience of maintaining an app such as Diffs Global, plus providing a consistent way of access of rendering diffs on multiple parts of the product, because we don't have that today. So it starts with that. The maintenance cost of the code base has been growing over time, and we want to find an architecture alternative that allows us a long runway to grow without the code falling into the same habits of being incredibly complex to maintain. Yeah, I think that's the start. Anyone else wants to add anything? There's also a couple of things like that been popping up here and there in Thomas' proposal about every time we want to add telemetry or something, we're going to have to dig around where is the place in the code where we're doing that change in the state or UI action or something, and then introduce there the call for telemetry or something like that, which makes it really hard to extend and to just extend the current functionality. So we were dreaming of a future where we could rely on an event system where you just set up your listeners and you have some sort of way of setting up whether a layer of listeners that would take care of, for example, telemetry across the board from one single code base part, instead of having to go into each and every part of the app to infiltrate telemetry code. You'd have the telemetry module or adapter or whatever that would declaratively almost specify, all right, when this event happens, do this, when this event happens, do that. And that was kind of like some of the intentions behind the event system idea. But also we have sometimes people coming over to our playground and play and write code on top of the AMRs. One of the classic examples is code quality, because our team didn't work on that feature, which adds little symbols on the gutter of the line numbers to indicate that there was a regression on code quality on this line, and that was built by someone else. So we wanted to find also potential ways to accommodate for those extensions without having to change the core code of the app. And that's like all that's been stirring this ideas up. Make sense? Cool. Any more thoughts about what Stanislav presented?
I had two kind of things that wasn't touched on, both in this and also Thomas's video. A is, what's the debugging experience will look like for both of these? Because if it's Flux, there's very mature system to know which action trigger, which state change, that sort of thing. So that's number one. Number two is my understanding is like we push the system out eventually. This will be used in elsewhere, meaning that we'll have to onboard on community contributors to a system like this. What would that look like? Because it would be a new way of managing a pretty core piece of front end, right? Like states.
Stanislav, you want to talk to the first one?
Yeah, for the developer experience, it's much better than what Vuex has. So with Vuex, you have to write mutations, and that's the only way to track how you change the state. With Pinia, you don't have to do that. All the actions are automatically tracked in the view DevTools, so you can open DevTools, see which actions were triggered, which exactly state they changed, how it looked like. So it's pretty much straightforward. You use DevTools to debug everything that happens inside of Pinia store.
So this one
take on the
is,
second
sorry, this
question.
one is just the view. Oh, I see on our website. Okay. Sounds good.
Also, I think Pinia supports a better hot reloading. So usually when you change something inside Vuex, you have to reload the whole page. And with Pinia, you don't have to do that because hot reloading is built in already from the ground up. So it's much better in that regard as well.
What was the second question? Sorry.
How do we roll out changes like this as more on a higher level to community contributors? Or just us in general, I guess. It's just because we would like to push this out eventually, I guess, outside of this team and it's
Right.
feature.
So we try to conform with practices across the board whenever we can. Or well, I mean, most of the times. When we have exceptions, then we rely on either technical documentation or the code itself to like lead the way. And I guess we don't have a lot of community contributions deep. Oh, correct me if I'm wrong, fellas. Into our depths of our front end apps. We do sometimes have like a small feature here and there that we provide some guidance on the issues when they ask. It's not uncommon to have community contributors ask for guidance on the issues on how to build it, and then we can provide it. But of course, not very sustainable. So I think it will be like technical documentation that we'll be writing to specify how we want to do this. The one thing we have to keep in mind is that we don't want to be introducing libraries, multiple libraries to achieve things that we already have in the code base. So we're very mindful that we live in our little complex front-end app, but we're still part of a larger front-end ecosystem that other people have to review code on. And this is, you've probably heard us talk about that, like in the call, where we do have some concerns about keeping our code reviewable, which does limit a little bit of the things we can do. But also that's a benefit, right? If you can take the benefit of having other people review our code, we also win into capacity and bandwidth. So a trade-off, I guess. So I would say technical docs, support on issues, and what we also have, Stanislav, the I don't know if that viewer component like Galilee would apply to here, but we also use some things like those to show patterns for not for this part, but potentially for the other part and how the viewers are written and stuff.
I'll just add to that we treat developer accessibility really seriously. So our guideline for external contributors and for internal contributors is the same. So we just prepare great docs. So it's straightforward how you can create Pinia stores, how you can maintain them, how it works. That's the first part. And we already have NMR for developer documentation, which I prepared. You can go through that and see how we actually recommend Pinia to be used in GitLab. It's not always that we should use Pinia. Like in some cases, for example, if you need complex logic with GraphQL, you better use Apollo client not Pinia. And second, we ourselves should provide a great example of the code that we write. So everyone that comes to the MR page and to the Diffs app should read the adapters code, should read the components code, and clearly understand the patterns that we use and be able to reapply them for their own needs. So I think setting a great example is one of the key priorities here.
Speaking of which, Stas, one of the things we need to do is whenever we have deprecated code in the code base, because we don't always clean it out as soon as we'd like, to flag it as deprecated so it doesn't act as a, oh, I saw it there, so I just copied what was there. Now you have a spreading problem. So yeah, that's going to be part of eventually when Pinia's global MR docs, global docs MR gets merged, we potentially have to go through labeling all the Vuex stores as this is not deprecated. Don't start new Vuex stores, please. Check these docs.
Actually, it's already deprecated. If you go to any Vuex store usage, you'll see
that it's already there.
ESLint comment that says disable specific line for the import.
Right.
You cannot import Vuex in components without disabling this line. So it's already deprecated across the whole GitLab.
Can you tell I haven't been in the code base for a while?
Yeah,
that makes sense. Thanks. On your presentation, Stas, there was some things that I was thinking when I looked at it. There is a familiarity to this that definitely feels easy to use and feels like comfortable because it's known. What prevents us from later down the line coming back to where we are today? Essentially, just if one of the stores starts growing and growing and growing, it's up to us to keep it tidy, right? So what do you think is different and will prevent us from falling back into the current situation?
I think the fact that you can split the store as much as you would like to. So I even mentioned that in the documentation MR. So if you feel that your store gets too big and it's becoming too hard to maintain and to understand, you should probably consider just splitting it up into multiple stores, because clearly the store does more than it should. So I think the fact that it can be split up into smaller pieces as much as you like to provides great way forward for scalability. So we can add more features without actually sacrificing developer experience. There will be more stores, but they will be at a manageable state. They won't be 1,000 lines long just for the actions, for example.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good point. So when I go back to Thomas' snippet, the unified communication layer for code review apps, this is the snippet he prepared for us. So what part of, if you could help me just to understand, what part of this would Pinia cover, essentially?
Everything that is related to application state management, that is covered by Pinia. Okay. It can also cover data access part of the application, like fetching data from REST API on GraphQL. It can do that as well, but it's not as efficient as ad hoc solutions for that, right?
So you do the request from within the store itself?
You can do that. The benefit of the Pinia is that you can contain that in a smaller file. And for example, we decide that we want to use another library just for data management. We can take the smaller store, remove it, rewrite it with a new solution, and it's just one change. It's not required to rewrite the whole Pinia store or the whole system to get it working. Because it's so granular, you can take out smaller pieces, refactor them, and it all still works.
think there's one thing that's when you were showing popped up in my mind, which is all these imports of other stores. In the past, we've had significant efforts to bring down the memory footprint on the Vuex stores. Phil definitely remembers how we, was hunting down where the diff lines were getting replicated that were just bloating the memory usage, up to a gigabyte. So that's part of a question that I think we'll only answer in practice, because by having smaller stores, I think it definitely is less likely that we'll have that bloatedness and, garbage collecting and smaller apps anyway. So all of that feels like potentially has a smaller increase in size. But what's your thoughts there? Do you think that's a risk of having stores that end up being, or is it more of a discipline thing where like Thomas was describing on his snippet, separating state from data and having data be stored somewhere, in the DOM, for example, because the big parts of data are already stored in the DOM because they come from server-side rendering. So it might be that will be just from the starting point, we'll be in a position where, hey, the big monster in the big elephant in the room that was bloating a memory footprint is always accessible from the DOM, and we can always fetch it from there. Do you think that's the case, or we'll always bring it to Pini as well?
I think we solved the memory problem already by going server-side. So our main cause for large memory footprint came from the fact that we had to fetch all the lines, store them in memory, and basically render them as view components. And when we say render as view component, you can multiply this data by 20 times, 30 times, because it's essentially creating a component for each diff file. Each diff file can have a lot of components inside it. And that's what exactly led to the memory problem. Since we are rendering diff files on the server and they are already in the DOM, we don't have that overhead anymore. And basically we can do whatever we want in the Pinia store. We are not that limited anymore.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. I think we're gonna potentially have this vision, and I want to discuss some things with Thomas about his snippet thing. So I think this recording will be useful to have as homework for our next week's session. So I definitely want to start getting these two perspectives head to head and try to get us an outcome on the plan for the next steps. In terms of just a final question, we've talked in another call where an important part of the Thomas's proposal is the event system. So could we still have some sort of notification system based on the Pinia store? And how could we do that? Like, what I mean by that is like you do something, and anybody interested in that change can follow that and be notified.
So Pinia uses a reactivity system from Vue, which is a higher level system. It's a more higher level than event-based system, for example. So in events-based system, everything is around events. In the reactivity system, everything is around state. So you can watch state wherever you want. You don't necessarily have to use Vue components in order to access Pinia's stores. So for example, if you need to use it inside an adapter, you can do so. And in the issue I've linked, I actually have an example of how can you do that. You can both subscribe to state changes, you can actually mutate the store, you can access the state directly. So nothing is really blocking for you here. Everything is possible outside of components.
Okay, we'll keep this conversation going next week. Chao, you want to say something? You unmuted yourself before we go.
Oh, no, I'm good. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Just
Just make sure that gave you the word before ending the call. Thank you so much. This was productive. Thanks for putting the issue together, Stas. And one thing I like there is like would be in line with your proposed approach for the whole front end thing. So that's a positive thing. We wouldn't have much of a battle there. But yeah, let's talk about the other alternative next week and try to put this head to head and try to come up with a conclusion. So thanks everybody for your time, and I'll see you later.